I'm Ann Spinney of the Music Department and the Irish Studies program here at Boston College, and I work with Seamus Connolly with the Irish music courses and the Celtic music courses that we have here. I'd like to thank you all so much for coming here this weekend and sharing with us your scholarship, your experiences, and your insights of Patrick Kavanagh. Part of the legacy that Kavanagh left us are poems that have made great songs. And we're very fortunate in having here today one of the great interpreters of songs, one of the great ballad singers, Danny Doyle from Dublin. Mr. Doyle's presentation is called The Glee-Men Sing, the stories and songs of Yeats, Joyce, O'Casey, Behan, and Kavanagh. And I should mention there'll be a reception afterwards right outside, hosted by Isolde Moylan, the Consul General of Ireland, and thanks very much for that. Danny has already introduced himself very well to you, but perhaps I could just remind you that he was part of the scene that has been called the folk revival in Irish music. Tells me he made his first recording in 1966. So some of us have grown up listening to his voice. It's a classic voice. We're very fortunate in America that he came to live over here. He's been called an international treasure, shared between the two nations. Danny Doyle, as you have heard already, sings all kinds of songs. When he sings the classic songs, even the old chestnuts, he has a rare and wonderful ability to make them expressive and real and fresh. And you've already experienced some of that. You'll experience more of that in the program. And I'd like to also point out there are CDs for sale out in an event outside the hall here. Also, so that you can experience Danny's wonderful voice, we want to remind you about cell phones and beepers and things like that. You'll want to turn them on after we're done here today. Please join me then in welcoming Danny Doyle.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks very much. Thank you very much indeed. Well, my old friend Seamus Connolly called me some time ago and asked me to come up and do something at the Patrick Kavanagh seminar, sing Patrick songs and tell a few Patrick stories. I said I can do that, but to my best of my knowledge, Kavanagh only wrote 2 songs. So I told Seamus it would be a very short program. Well, he said, you know, what do you suggest? So I suggested that many of the writers wrote songs. Yeats wrote songs, Joyce wrote songs, Sean O'Casey, the Dublin playwright, wrote songs. Kavanagh wrote a couple of songs, and Brendan Behan wrote many songs. Probably O'Casey wrote more songs than any of them. We can't do them all today, obviously, but we'll do a few of them. So I called it The Glee-Men Sing, for the simple reason that Yeats used the word Glee-Man to describe a very, very famous Dublin ballad singer, early 19th century ballad singer called Michael Moran, who wrote marvellous songs under the pen name of Zosimus. And he wrote an article about him and he called him the Glee-Man. And the definition of a Glee-Man is really a wandering minstrel, and then it evolved to include, say, barbershop quartets. Now, our quintet today never ever performed together, but they gave us much mirth and glee, so we're going to call them Glee-Men. I just finished writing this a few days ago, so I haven't had time to memorize it. You will see me glancing at my notes. I hope you'll forgive me for that. And we'll start off chronologically and begin with Yeats. When William Butler Yeats was born in Dublin, 1865, the delivering doctor pronounced him a fine, strong baby that, quote, could be left out on the windowsill all night and it would do him no harm. And indeed, this fella was no Dr. Spock, I can tell you. But the hardy infant would grow to a fortitude that would carry him to the insecurity attendant upon one who travelled the road of the professional poet in the late 19th century. As a boy, Yeats would spend his summers amongst vivid, colourful County Sligo characters. The landscape of that county making an indelible impression upon him. But he would do what few writers have done. He impressed himself so vividly on Sligo that it is forever after known as Yeats' country. He rediscovered our ancient mythology, poetry and folklore, and came to delight in Celtic mysticism and the pagan tradition. He claimed that even his dreams were pagan. Yeats had discovered our buried folk tradition that had flourished 500 years before the birth of Christ, surviving in the cottages of the west of Ireland, despite the many attempts to exterminate it. He set about articulating it into some of the finest literature of the 20th century. At his Abbey Theatre in Dublin, the romantic glow of his productions startled the Irish racial memory out of sleep. The plays, based on the ancient sagas and folk tales, were seen as prescient allegories of the coming struggle, impelling men and women to the barricades in the rebellion in Dublin in 1916. But it seems our great poet had a constantly distracted and absent-minded air about him, and even when dining, it is reported, he was utterly impervious to what he ate. Once in a restaurant, when he had finished his dinner, he asked for a menu and ordered another, completely forgetting he had already eaten. Once during the dessert course, he was given parsnips by mistake. He said, "This is very peculiar pudding." He would absent-mindedly put sugar in his soup and salt in his coffee. He also had something of the other world about him. He strode through Dublin with his head in a cloud of ideas, talking, singing in his eerie manner, and wrestling with abstractions. He floated down the streets like something dreamed into existence, and out of the tussle with himself came marvellous poetry. One of his poems is The Fiddler of Dooney, and I've always felt it was ready-made to be set to an air. So that's what I've done. When I play on my fiddle in Dooney, folks dance like a wave on the sea. My cousin is priest in Kilvarnet, my brother at Macarabuie. I passed my brother and cousin, they read in their books of prayer. I read in my book of songs that I bought at the Sligo Fair. For the good are always the merry, save by an evil chance, and the merry love the fiddle, and the merry love to dance. When we come at the end of time to Peter sitting in state, he'll smile on the three old spirits that call me first through the gates. And when the folk there spy me, they will all come up to me with, "Here is the fiddler of Dooney," and dance like a wave on the sea. For the good are always the merry, save by an evil chance, and the merry love the fiddle, and the merry love to dance. When I play on my fiddle in Dooney, folks dance like a wave on the sea. My cousin is priest in Kilvarnet, my brother at Macarabuie. For the good are always the merry, save by an evil chance, and the merry love the fiddle, and the merry love to dance. For the good are always the merry, save by an evil chance, and the merry love the fiddle, and the merry love to dance. Thank you. Thanks. Yeats became obsessed and fell into unrequited love with an extraordinary beauty called Maud Gonne, the daughter of an aristocratic family who would spend her entire life in revolutionary activity. She told him she could never marry him, yet he wrote plays and poems for her, making her the wellspring of his inspiration. When he complained that life without her was unbearable, she told him, "You are making beautiful poetry out of what you call your unhappiness, and you're happy in that." He wrote one of his loveliest poems for her. It's called When You Are Old. When you are old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once, and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace, and loved your beauty with love false or true. But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And bending down beside the bars, murmur a little sadly how love fled, and paced upon the mountains overhead, and hid his face among a cloud of stars. Yeats continued to pursue Maud Gonne, but again and again she refused him. He wrote, "I might as well have offered devotion to an image in a milliner's window or a statue in a museum." Yeats was, as I suppose poets need to be, a practical man. The editor of a Dublin newspaper rang him late one evening in 1923 to tell him that he had just won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now, the man was almost incoherent with excitement, talking about the great honour to Ireland and the great honour to Yeats, when Yeats interrupted him by saying, "For Christ's sake, man, get a hold of yourself. How much do I get?" The sum was about £8,000, a very considerable one at the time. And when Yeats and his wife had gotten over their excitement, they searched the house for a bottle of wine with which to celebrate. When none could be found, they put the frying pan on the stove and cooked up some celebratory pork sausages instead. Mind you, they were Hafner sausages, the best sausages in Dublin. When reading Yeats, you might conclude that he was a singer or a musician, so rhythm drunk is his verse. Although he claimed to be conscious of tunes when he wrote, he was in fact tone deaf. When visiting a friend, he heard a piano playing in another room. He asked the friend, "Is that a violin or a cello playing?" And you certainly get that rhythm-drunk feeling in his wonderful poem, The Lake Isle of Innisfree. "I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of linnets' wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's core." This is one of Yeats's songs. It's very lovely. It's called Down by the Sally Gardens. Down by the the Sally Gardens my love and I did meet. She passed the Sally Gardens with little snow white feet. She bid me take love easy as the leaves grow on the trees. Ah, but I, being young and foolish, with her could not agree. In a field all by the river, my love and I did stand, and on my leaning shoulder she laid her snow white hand. She bid me take love easy as the grass grows on the weirs. Ah, but I, being young and foolish, and now am full of tears. Down by the Sally Gardens my love and I did meet. She passed the Sally Gardens on little snow white feet. She bid me take life easy as the leaves grow on the trees. Ah, but I was young and foolish, with her could not agree. Ah, but I was young and foolish, and now I'm full of tears. Thanks very much. Thank you. Turning old and grey, Yeats put pen to paper and wrote his epitaph. Under bare Ben Bulben's head in Drumcliff churchyard, Yeats is laid. An ancestor was rector there long years ago. A church stands near by the road, an ancient cross. No marble, no conventional phrase on limestone quarried near the spot. By his command, these words are cut. Cast a cold eye on life, on death. Horseman, pass by. Wonder what that means. If you have any ideas, please tell me later. We come now to James Joyce. Joyce and Yeats knew each other somewhat. Yeats was walking down the street one day in Dublin, and a young man stopped him to have a conversation. And the young man asked Joyce how old he was. He asked Yeats how old he was, and Yeats said he was 43 or something like that. And the young man, a very impertinent 19-year-old James Joyce, said to him, he said, "You're too old to be influenced by me. Goodbye," and walked away. Yeats apparently was quite impressed by the impertinence. But anyway, one of the giants of the Irish literary revival went into exile in 1904 to live in Europe. 20 years later, James Joyce, living in Zurich, when asked, "Do you miss Dublin?" replied, "I never left it." Joyce was a good, if erratic, student, a tall, swaggering, bored, angry, intellectually exceptional, impoverished young man in hand-me-down clothes. He was very sure of himself and insistent upon recognition of his talents. He was exuberant, quick-tongued, full of gaiety, and a fine singer, a very fine singer, with a repertoire of hundreds of songs. At parties, he would glide up and down the room with a hat, cane, and eyeglass in the manner of an old vaudevillian artist singing. As I walked along the wobble line with an independent air, you could hear the girls declare, he must be a millionaire. You can hear them sigh and wish to die. You can see them wink with the other eye at the man who broke the bank at Monte Carlo. He loved those kind of songs. He wrote parodies on many of them. Unfortunately, if you don't know the original songs, the parodies don't seem to work, in my opinion. He also loved silly little ditties like this one. Is your mother in Molly Malone? Molly cried, she's out. Is your father in Molly Malone? Molly cried, he's out. Then may I come in by the fireside and sit all alone with you? Molly said with a smile, hold your tongue for a while. Sure the fire's out too. Joyce grew up in an era of severe sexual repression, and like many another, he resorted to the bawdy houses around Montgomery Street in the slums of Dublin, or Night Town as he called it. In the brothels, when his various appetites had been assuaged, James would drink the rot-gut whiskey being sold by the madams, and when he was sufficiently tipsy, he would perform his favourite vaudeville song, a vaudevillian song that's now gone into the canon of Irish traditional music. It was actually written in England by an Englishman. We won't hold that against it. Anyway, it's got a great chorus. You might sing it with me. Hubert goes, whack full the dado, dance to your partner's wealth, the floor your trotters shake. Wasn't it the truth I told you? Lots of fun at Finnegan's Wake. This is a mouthful, I know. Just give me the rhythm in that case. And you start clapping on the word whack and finish on the word wake, and there's 16 claps altogether. You can't possibly go wrong. Now, it's a song about a Dublin man, a builder's labourer, and he had to go up the top of a high scaffolding one day with a load of bricks on his shoulder, and he got dizzy, probably from the effects of the night before. He slipped, fell on his head. Now, I will admit, the ground did break his fall, but unfortunately it was too far away to be of any benefit. So they held his wake, and this is what happened. Tim Finnegan lived in Wackland Street. Oh, a gentleman Irish, though mighty odd. He'd a beautiful brogue, so rich and sweet, and to rise in the world he carried the hod. Tim had a sort of a tippler's way. With a love for the liquor he was born. And to help him along with his work each day, get the hands ready, he'd stir up with the crater every morn. Whack full the dado, dance to your partner, while the floor your trotters shake. Wasn't it the truth I tell you? Lots of fun at Finnegan's Wake. Oh, very impressive. One morning Tim felt rather full. Now his head felt heavy, it made him shake. He fell off the ladder and he cracked his skull. So they carried him home, his corpse to wake. They rolled him up in a nice clean sheet, and they laid him out upon the bed. They put 14 candles around his feet, and a barrel of whiskey at his head. Whack full the dado, dance to your partner, while the floor your trotters shake. Wasn't it the truth I tell you? Lots of fun at Finnegan's Wake. His friends assembled at the wake. Mrs. Finnegan called out for the lunch. Well, first they brought in tea and cake, some pipes, tobacco and whiskey punch. Then Biddy O'Brien began to cry. Such a neat, clean corpse did yous ever see? Yarra Tim of Orneen, why this is I? Ah, shut your mouth, says Biddy McGee. Whack on the dado, dance to your partner, while the floor your trotters shake. Wasn't it the truth they tell you? Lots of fun at Finnegan's Wake. Then Peggy O'Connor took up the job. Ara Biddy, said she, you're wrong, I'm sure. But Biddy gave her a belt and a gob, which left her sprawling on the floor. It was then the war did soon engage. It was woman to woman and man to man. Shillelagh, it was all the rage. And row and the ruction soon began. Back for the dado, dance to your partner, while the floor your trotters shake. Wasn't it the truth I tell you? Lots of fun at Finnegan's Wake. Then Mickey Mulvaney, he ducked his head when a bottle of whiskey flew at him. It missed, and landing on the bed, the liquor marinated Tim. Tim revives. See how he's rising. And Timothy jumping from the bed cries, whirl your whiskey round like blazes. Be the thunder and Jesus, do you think I'm dead? Whack for the dad who danced to your parted, but the floor you troller shake. Wasn't it the truth I told you? Lots of fun at Finnegan's Wake. Whack for the dad who danced to your parted, but the floor you troller shake. Wasn't it the truth I told you? Lots of fun at Finnegan's Wake. Up. Nice rhythm. Catholic, obviously. The one we like the best. Nora Barnacle was the red-haired, earthy Galway woman who fell in love and rushed into exile with James Joyce, a man she hardly knew. Nora was a hotel chambermaid and cared little for literature. But her directness and robust sensuality attracted Joyce, and she gave him faithfulness and constantly nurtured his life and art. When Joyce's father heard her name, Barnacle, he said, "Oh, Jesus, I suppose she'll stick to him anyway." In his book, Ulysses, Joyce immortalized his drab, squalid city as no other has ever been. Recalling one day of his youth, June 16, 1904, he turned the eventlessness of everyday life into sublime literature, showing us that the universal is in the particular and the local. His masterpiece is filled with the marrow bone of Dublin. It is huge, meandering, comic, and carnal. The Ballad of Percy O'Reilly, well, I wouldn't have to tell you it's from Finnegan's Wake because it has all of that convoluted language that Joyce absolutely loved. The Ballad of Percy O'Reilly. It's a hell of a mouthful to sing, but I'll do my best. Have you heard about one Humpty Dumpty? How he fell with a roll and a rumble, tied up like Lord Oliver Crumble at the back of the magazine wall, hump, helmet and all. He was one time the king of our castle, now he's kicked about like a rotten old parsnip, and from Green Street he'll be sent by order of his worship to the penal jail of Mountjoy, jail him with joy. Sweet bad luck on the waves washed to our island, the hooker of the Hammerfest Viking, and God's curse on the day when Eblana Bay saw his black and tan man of war on the harbour bar. He was jolting by Wellington's monument, our notorious hippopotamus, when some bugger let down the backstrap of his omnibus, and he caught his debt of Fusiliers with his rent in his rears. Give him 6 years. Then we'll have a free trade Gaels band and mass meeting for the sod, the brave son of Scandinavary, and we'll bury him down in Oxmanstown, along with the deaf and dumb Danes, and all their remains. I'm glad he didn't write too many songs. I often wonder, is James Joyce laughing in his grave at the hullabaloo that has grown up around him, and how time and mania have turned him into an industry. His books, I don't think read, but rather studied. He must find it hilarious that hundreds of tomes have been written about him, and Joycean theses churned out by the hundreds every year. I wonder, does he find it amusing that every word of Ulysses has been cross-indexed, contextualized, and etymologized? Would he be bothered taking part in the yearly Bloomsday celebration in Dublin every June 19th? Would he even recognize Dublin for the city that he recorded with such incredible detail, abundant detail, in his book Ulysses, was pre-motor car, it was pre-tram car, pre-cinema, pre-telephone, it was pre-everything. Its young and old men, its women and girls, constantly talked of operas, plays, arias, poetry, and songs and literature. The city was oral as no other in Western Europe was. And Even today in Ireland, there is still an ambivalence about Joyce's writings. Many consider him a silly old windbag, and I know when we were younger, before I grew up to learn to love his writings, we called his book useless. An American reporter from the Washington Post, actually, went to Dublin last June to report on the Bloomsday activities. As he walked along Sandy Cove Beach, south of Dublin, he saw this grey-haired woman walking her dog, and he stopped her and asked her for directions to the James Joyce Museum. She gave him a disparaging look and said, "Oh, don't tell me you're caught up on all this silly craze over Joyce too. He's way overblown, period. And besides, he probably didn't write all those books by himself. Can you not think of something more interesting to do while you're in Dublin?" The reporter said, "No, ma'am, I can't." She said, "Oh, you needn't be no-mamming me. Bloody well get on with it then." I'm sure Joyce would have gotten a laugh out of that. This is a song called Finnegan, Are You Really Dead? It was not written by Joyce, written by two friends of mine in Dublin. And one is Gerald Davis, a Joycean scholar and a reenactor. And the other is a dear friend of mine, a television producer and presenter called Shay Healy. As I walked out through Dublin city early on a fine spring morn, my thoughts were slowly turned to Joyce and to the town where he was born. What would he think of Dublin now? The muse sang softly in my head. Ah, sure, he was the queer one, all the diddle yeah with that. Finnegan, are you really dead? Though Eccles Street is cold and shuttered, Leopold Bloom is always home. Down Sackville Street, plumb stately Buck, and Blazes Boyle and spectres roam. Sweet Anne Olivia flows to the sea, past Molly Bloom's immortal bed. Ah, sure, he was the queer one, for the diddle yeah with that. Finnegan, are you really dead? Down along by Sandy Mount, the seagulls wheel and cry. Young Stephen sees eternity crush out before his eye, and far beyond is exile that's calling him away. Far from his tower of Sandy Cove, hard fast by Dublin Bay. And like the seagulls high above, the thoughts spin through his mind. He soars above the city streets that soon he'll leave behind. He's blind to what he loves of her, he thinks he'll shake her free. But even in a far-off land, a Dubliner he'll be. As I went out through Dublin city as the sun was going down, scenes and pictures from his stories filled my head with sights and sounds. Ah, Dublin, how your son has served you. All across the world his words are read. Ah, sure, he was the queer one, for the diddle yeah with that. Finnegan, are you really dead? Ah, sure, he was the queer one, for the diddle yeah with that. Finnegan, are you really dead? Go ahead. The Dublin that Sean O'Casey was born into presented the most extraordinary contrast in poverty and magnificence. The once fashionable Georgian mansions built for the 18th century aristocrats now housed 1/3 of the city's population, each house sheltering as many as 100 people, one family per room. The death rate in this quarter of the city was the highest in Europe. In fact, it was greater than even that of Moscow or Calcutta. But behind the once stately, now crumbling facades, there was life and anger and defiance of unjust authority. Out of these slums came a hobnail-booted socialist and lyric genius, Sean O'Casey. Playwright and songwriter, O'Casey, following in Yeats's footsteps, would become the new master of the Abbey Theatre. His plays, The Shadow of a Gunman, The Plough and the Stars, and Juno and the Paycock, are bursting with humanity. They are savagely and bitterly funny, his characters inhabiting an impoverished yet vigorous world. O'Casey created many characters, but none richer or as many-sided as himself. He was always spoiling for intellectual battle, even going so far as to cultivate grievances for the purpose. He fell out with absolutely everybody. Eventually he fell out with his country, and like Joyce, he left it, never to return. But for all his bitterness, he became a great comic writer and turned the ferocious, dark inequalities and passions of his time into great art. He witnessed the beginning of the rebellion in Ireland. It really started in 1913 when the Dublin working class, who were essentially slaves, decided they could take no more. And in his marvellous autobiographies, O'Casey wrote, "A new shouting was soon to be heard in Dublin in 1913. Discontent had lit a blazing bonfire, and out of the festering tenements, that rag and bone shop of the human heart, swarmed a hunger, agitated and ragged army of slaves. Too often stricken, they now struck back. They called a general strike. But all the agitation and expectation would amount to nothing, because the intransigent masters of Dublin, the employers, declared, let them submit or starve." In Dublin City in 1913, the boss was boss and employed a slave. The woman worked and the child went hungry, and along came Larkin like a mighty wave. The worker cringed when the boss man thundered, 70 hours was his weekly chore. He'd asked for little and less was granted, lest given little he might ask for more. In the month of August, the boss man told us no union man for him could work. We stood by Larkin, we told the boss man to fight to starve, we would not shirk. 8 months we fought and 8 months we starved. We followed Larkin through thick and thin. But hungry homes and crying children, they broke our hearts and we could not win. After 8 months of riots, street battles and picketing and some deaths, the men, broken by the hunger of their wives and children, were forced to sign a pledge renouncing the union. They had asked for little and less was granted, lest given little they might ask for more. Radical nationalists in Ireland now began to plan a rebellion for Easter 1916. In the third person, Sean O'Casey wrote, Kathleen Ní Houlihan, Mother Ireland, was winding the clock of rebellion. Once again, the martial tramping of feet was echoing. O'Casey heard the drums under the window, and with multitudes of men and women stepped out onto the broad, crowded highway of Irish nationalism. As they marched, they sang his song. Is an O'Casey song called The Grand Old Dame Britannia, a satire, I suppose. I sing, Ireland, I'm so proud of you, you sing, said the grand old Dame Britannia, and poor little Belgium tried and true, said the grand old Dame Britannia. No problem. Oh, Ireland, I'm so proud of you, said the grand old Dame Britannia. And poor little Belgium, tried and true, said the grand old Dame Britannia. You've closed your ears to the Sinn Féin lies. You know every Gael that for England dies. He'll enjoy home rule in the clear blue skies, said the grand old Dame Britannia. Ah, the castle's now an altered place, said the grand old Dame Britannia. It's the drawing room of the Irish race, said the grand old Dame Britannia. John Redmond to the throne is bowed with a chanting, cheering Irish crowd. Ah, sure, it's like the days of Shane the Proud, said the grand old Dame Britannia. John Redmond now home rule has won, said the grand old Dame Britannia. He's finished what Wolfe Tone begun, said the grand old Dame Britannia. Yet rebels through the country stalk, shouting 67 and bachelor's walk. Did you ever hear such foolish talk, said the grand old Dame Britannia. Ah, scholars, hurlers, saints and bards, said the grand old Dame Britannia. Come along and enlist in the Irish Guards, said the grand old Dame Britannia. Each man that treads on German feet will be given a parcel tied up neat of a tombstone cross on a winding sheet, said the grand old Dame Britannia. Oh, Ireland, I'm so proud of you, said the grand old Dame Britannia. And poor little Belgium, tried and true, said the grand old Dame Britannia. You've closed your ears to the Sinn Féin lies, for you know every Gael that for England dies. He'll enjoy home rule in the clear blue skies, said the grand old Dame Britannia. Thanks for joining in. On Easter Monday 1916, the Dublin City Church bells struck noon, the signal for the rebellion. Outside the General Post Office in Sackville Street, Patrick Pearse read the Proclamation of Independence. Now, the historic moment was only slightly marred by an incident that happened just up the street. Just up the street, a tipsy, bowler-hatted gentleman was urinating against the wall of a closed public lavatory. He shouted, "Ah, Jesus, at last we have a republic. We can do what we like." A British warship sailed up the Liffey and began to shell the rebel positions. By the end of the week, Dublin looked like a town in war-ravaged Belgium. But the gamble was lost, and the 16 leaders stepped out for death. 14 of them executed in the execution yard in Kilmainham Jail in Dublin, one executed in the Tower of London, and one executed in Cork. O'Casey wrote, "Listen, listen all, a volley, another and another. What Irish heart is thrilled now by the eagle's whistle, or the notes of the cuckoo calling summer closer? What foot now will move merry to the strings of a violin? The guns suddenly give forth a jet of flame, and another, still holding Ireland by her rough but graceful hand, bids farewell to the world." Our old friend William Butler Yeats wrote, "Now and in time to be, wherever green is worn, are changed, changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born." In 1917, when he was 37 and she was 22, O'Casey fell in love with a girl called Mary Keating, a very good-looking girl with soft eyes. He would mail poems and love letters to her twice a day. And by October of that year, she fell seriously ill, and when it seemed she might not pull through, miserable and sick at heart, anticipating the loss of his true love, O'Casey wrote this achingly bleak song. In it he calls her Maggie. The song is called "Since Maggie Went Away." No more I stroll, no more I stroll along the Boreen. or see the scarlet poppies flame amidst the corn green. No more beneath the hedge I'll watch the butterflies at play. For me heart is filled with woe, since Maggie went away. The sweet wild rose that loved to see us there, and seemed to bid us hope, now droops and tells me to despair. The linnet sings his song unheard, perched on a leafy spray, and me heart is filled with woe, since Maggie went away. The gentle flowers, their happy charm has fled, and now they seem like blossoms strewn above the silent dead. They're symbols now of sorrow deep and life's swift sure decay. And me heart is filled with woe, since Maggie went away. Then welcome grief, man's warm, true-hearted friend. For though all things be false, thou still art faithful to the end. And now I'll walk alone with thee till life turns into clay. For me heart is filled with woe, since Maggie went away. And me heart is filled with woe, since Maggie went away. Thank you. Thanks very much. O'Casey's masterful plays were enormously successful and are still performed around the world to this very day. When Yeats's Abbey Theatre rejected his new work, The Silver Tassie, O'Casey, with his persecution complex in high dudgeon, left the country and never came back. In one of his last letters, he wrote what might well or easily serve as his epitaph. I have found life an enjoyable, enchanting, active, and sometimes terrifying experience. A lament in one ear, maybe, but always a lovely song in the other. Speaking of lovely songs, this is another one of O'Casey's song from one of his plays. Violets were scenting the woods, Nora displaying their charms to the bee. When I first said I loved only you, Nora, and you said you loved only me. The chestnut blooms gleam through the glade, Nora. A robin sang loud on a tree. When I first said I loved only you, Nora, and you said you loved only me. The golden robed daffodils shone, Nora, and danced in the breeze from the leaves. when I first said I loved only you, Nora, and you said you loved only me. The trees, birds and bees sang a song, Nora, of happier transports to be. When I first said I loved only you, Nora, and you said you loved only me. The chestnut blooms gleam through the glade, Nora, a robin sang loud from a tree. When I first said I loved only you, Nora, and you said you loved only me. Thank you. Patrick Kavanagh and Brendan Behan were my neighbours in Dublin, and I knew them somewhat, well, as much as a young teenage boy can know such complicated people. But Kavanagh, as you know, came from County Monaghan and would become one of Ireland's greatest poets after William Butler Yeats. Brendan Behan, from Dublin's inner city, would achieve international fame and notoriety with his gritty plays. Now, Patrick, or Paddy as we call him, Paddy and Brendan were friends in the beginning, but when they later became enemies, it was distressful to often hear them, shouting the most awful insults at each other across the street. Kavanagh, when it came to swearing, was in the genius class. He had the most unbelievable barnyard expressions you ever heard. I couldn't possibly even tell you the mildest of them. And he would call across the street to Brendan Behan when they hated each other. He would call across, he'd say, "You are evil incarnate," in that Monaghan accent. "You are evil incarnate." I can't tell you what Behan shouted back because it's very vulgar. But anyway, maybe in private I'll tell you. But before they became enemies, they were actually friends and would go drinking together. Now, it was the custom in those times. They were generally broke, but whoever had the money bought the drinks. And Brendan, who was a house painter by trade, had finished a big house painting job and had a pile of money in his pocket. So he invited Kavanagh to go on a drinking spree the next day. And he said he would hire a car and a driver. That would save them the trouble of walking between pubs. It would save time and they could get in more drinking. So late that night, about 11 o'clock, they've been drinking now for about 12 hours. They find themselves in a pub on the north side of Dublin city near Glasnevin Cemetery, and they are quite drunk. And Kavanagh says to Brendan, "Brendan, look over your shoulder. You see that little man sitting by the door in the dark overcoat and the soft hat?" Brendan says, "What about him?" He says, "I think he's following us. I have an idea he's following us. I saw him in the last 4 or 5 pubs we've been in." So Brendan jumps off the stool, rushes over, grabs the poor man by the scruff of the neck, pushes him up against the wall and says, "Okay, what are you up to? Why are you following us? Come on, out with it, out with it." And the man says, "Oh, Jesus, Mr. Behan, go easy. I'm your driver." When Brendan was 16 years of age in 1939, he took the boat to Liverpool to take part in a bombing campaign. Now, he was inspired in this by his grandmother, Furlong, who had gone to England previously to blow up Buckingham Palace and the House of Parliament. Just before the police nabbed her, thankfully, She managed to hide a couple of sticks of gelignite down her bosom, and she became highly indignant when the police refused to accept her explanation that the gelignite was Peggy's leg. Now, Peggy's leg is the Irish name for a stick of peppermint candy. At age 77, Granny Furlong was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. Brendan, too, thankfully, was caught before he could commit any outrage. And after his time in prison, he said he found it utterly impossible to ever hate Englishmen again. He said he loved them. They were kind and generous and decent. The ones he met in jail, that is. And he would often sing this song. He would view his revolutionary activities in a humorous vein, and was later glad he had been caught before anything awful happened. When first I went to London in the year of 39, the city looked so wonderful, the girls were so divine. But the cops, they got suspicious and they soon gave me the knock. I was charged with being the owner of an old alarm clock. Next morning down at Marylebone, I caused no little stir. The ARP were busy and the telephones did bore. Said the judge, I'm going to charge you with the possession of this machine, and I'm also going to charge you with the wearing of the green. I said to him, Your Honour, if you give me half a chance, I'll show you how me small machine can make the policeman dance. It ticks away politely till you get an awful shock, till it ticks away the gelignite in me old alarm clock. Well, the judge, he takes a look at me and says, See here, my man, for you and all your country, I don't give one damn. The only time you'll take is mine, 10 years in Dartmoor dock. You can count it by the ticking of your old alarm clock. Well, me cell, it isn't pretty and it isn't very big. This lonely Dartmoor prison would put many in the jigs. I'd long ago have left it if only I had got a couple of sticks of gelignite and me old alarm clock. Patrick Kavanagh was a mourning writer, lonely, without a penny in his pocket. He would spend the remainder of the day rambling the town, trying to kill the long, boring afternoons and evenings, gazing longingly at the goods on display in the bookshops and cafes, or lying on the grassy bank of the Grand Canal, dreaming of a pint of Guinness or a taste of whiskey. His rough, uncouth appearance masked exceptional intellectual gifts. He looked like a lanky scarecrow, scruffy, ungainly, hardly washed, with shabby clothes and dirty fingernails. I would often see him shambling along Baggot Street like a farmer behind a plough, talking loudly to himself, his mercurial, volatile temper always on the verge of exploding. Despite frequent displays of misogyny, Kavanagh craved the company of young women. A few, those of a literary bent, found him fascinating. But he could be terribly blunt and hurtful. Once in a bar, he got talking to this young lady, university student, and in the midst of the conversation, he ordered himself a drink. Now, the young lady became very offended that he had not bought her a drink. So she used a very, very Dublin expression to show her disapproval. She said, "Can you not see I have a mouth on me?" To which he replied, "How could I miss it? And it's swinging between your two ears like a skipping rope." He fell in love with a beautiful young college student who admired Kavanagh the poet, but declined the awkward advances of Kavanagh the unwashed. He was 6 Christmases of age. My father played the melodeon, my mother milked the cows, and I had a prayer like a white rose pinned on the Virgin Mary's blouse. Brendan Behan had remarkable parents. Kathleen and Stephen. Kathleen, whom I knew, was a charming, marvellous woman who would sing at the drop of a hat, or more accurately, at the pulling of a pint. I asked her to sing that song of Brendan's, song of hers that Brendan liked best. She thought for a moment and then launched into When All the World Was Young. Unfortunately, I can't for the life of me remember the air. But anyway, it goes, when all the world is young, lad, and all the trees are green, and every goose a swan, lad, and every lass a queen. Get up upon your big white horse and gaily ride away, for youth must have its fling, lad, and every dog his day. When all the world is old, lad, and all the trees are brown, and all your big high hopes come trembling, tumbling down. Go you to your corner, lad, the spent and maimed among. God grant you will find one face there, lad, you loved when you were young. Brendan wrote lots of marvellous songs. I wish I had time to do more of them. But he wrote a great one about the time he spent in Mountjoy prison in Dublin. It's called The Owl Triangle. When jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal, a hungry feeling came o'er me stealing, and the mice were squealing in my prison cell. And the old triangle went jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal. To begin the morning, the warder's bawling, get up, you bowsy, and clean up your cell. And the old triangle went jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal. The screw was peeping, Humpy Gussie lay sleeping, as I sat there dreaming of my girl Sal. And the old triangle went jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal. In the female prison there are 75 women, and it's up there with them I would love to dwell. And the old triangle went jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal, all along the banks of the Royal Canal. Hop! Lovely. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is but a small part of the story of our 5 writers. I often wonder, why is it that such a small island has produced a veritable galaxy of such exceptional talents? I pose the question, but I don't know the answer. Perhaps it's been the insular, claustrophobic island mentality that in part has fostered the need for expression. And I think the many-hued land of Ireland itself is inspirational. That ever-changing sky and the angle of the light, to my mind's eye, conspire to paint a sense of mystery, an intangible spirituality conducive possibly to dreaming. And when we reflect on the words of the Greek historian Herodotus, who described the Celts as overly fond of words, music and wine, it's safe to say that possibly some things never change. So we'll finish off with a Kavanagh song. I gave you a slice of it earlier. It's called If Ever You Go to Dublin Town. Before I go, I want to thank Seamus Connolly, my dear friend, he's not here today. He has to do a concert in Texas, I believe. Thank him for inviting me to be here. Thank you, Anne, and all the lovely people here for all their hospitality. And I'll end on a commercial note. I'll make it short. My CDs and my book are outside. If they don't sell, my mother can't have the operation. It's as simple as that. She gets the money. She insists upon it. If you'd like to go to Ireland, I'll take you. Next year, I'm taking 3 trips over. We go around on the coach. We see the country through the history, the songs, the poetry, the folklore, the music. Mostly we see it through a haze of Guinness, which is the best way to travel, I can assure you. And the flyers are out there. You can't come on the one in July. It's already booked out, I'm sorry. But May and October still has seats available. I'll be out there in a moment if you'd like a CD or something. And thank you so much to all of you for coming along today. I never thought I'd be standing here at a Patrick Kavanagh seminar, singing his songs and telling his story, especially after what happened with the hatchet incident. Shortly, a couple of days after the hatchet incident, I saw him coming down the street, and I crossed to the other side to get out of his way. But he called over to me. He said, "Young Doyle, you're about as useful as a goat's genolicers." Now, you know what a goat is. At the time, I didn't know what genolicers meant. I went home to my parents and I asked them, "What does the word genolicers mean?" They fell down laughing. I have to put this as circumspectly as possible. It's a rude term for part of a man's anatomy, testicles. So he said I was about as useful as a goat's testicles. So my family for years they never let me hear the end of it. And it was a long time before they ever called me Danny again. So I have Patrick Kavanagh to thank for that. I sing, he was a queer one, fa-la-la-di-do, he was a queer one, I tell you. If ever you go to Dublin town in 100 years or so, inquire for me in Baggot Street and what I was like to know. Ah, he was a queer one, fa-la-la-di-do, he was a queer one, I'll tell you. On Pembroke Road, look out for my ghost, dishevelled with shoes untied, playing through the railings with little children whose children have long since died. Oh, he was a nice man, fa-la-la-di-do, he was a nice man, I'll tell you. He had the knack of making men feel as small as they really were, which meant as great as God has made him, as males they disliked his air. Oh, he was a proud one, fa-la-la-di-do, he was a proud one, I'll tell you. I saw his name with 100 others in a book in the library. It said he had never fully achieved his potentiality. Oh, he was slothful, fa-la-la-di-do, he was slothful, I'll tell you. He knew posterity had no use for anything but the soul, the lines that speak, the passionate heart, the spirit that lives alone. Ah, he was a lone one, fa-la-la-di-do, he was a lone one, I'll tell you. If ever you go to Dublin town in 100 years or so, inquire for me in Baggot Street and what I was like to know. Ah, he was a queer one, he was a nice man, fa-la-la-di-do, he was a proud one, fa-la-la-di-do, he was slothful, fa-la-la-di-do, he was a lone one, fa-la-la-di-do, he was a lone one, I tell you. Thank you. Good night. God bless you. Thank you very much.